Hello and welcome to the vBrownbag afternoon session. I wanted to talk to you about a little presentation I like to call From Virtualization to Cloud, about adapting to the new magic in cloud IT. Before we get started, I'll introduce myself. You may have seen me rolling around the vBrownbag crew. My name is Wright. I'm known as @DiscoPosse on Twitter. I'm a systems architect, a blogger, and a cloud pundit, or I like to say I'm a cloud coach sometimes. You can find me at discoposse.com, which is where I blog. And if you really want to connect, which I encourage people to do, you can see there's my LinkedIn URL at the bottom. Or trust me, if you just do a search for Disco Posse on LinkedIn, I think I'm the only one. The important thing that I wanted to bring up today is exactly the reason why the vBrownbag and a lot of the OpenStack Summit world exists. And it's about community. One of the most important things that we find when we work together in an IT organization or in an IT community is just that. It's people that work together and we have a common goal. And the idea is that we all, even with some divergent plans along the way, we are working towards a greater ecosystem and making things better for everybody along the way. The important thing about community is not just us being here as a part of it and sharing the experience amongst each other, but the whole value is that we can share this everywhere, and this is kind of the PBS style of, we're powered by viewers like you. The very community that's watching live right now and who's going to watch this on YouTube and who's here at the OpenStack Summit is built around the idea of sharing in this community and sharing all of our information. What's really interesting in what we're seeing today and all week here at the OpenStack Summit and across the world in the industry is there's big changes ahead in how things are going to be done. This isn't, something I just want to say it's a paradigm shift or some goofy buzzword phrase that I'm going to attach to it, but really the truth is we are seeing a change in how things go in business, in information technology, and especially in what we do as administrators and virtualization administrators and any other role that's in the IT organizations. Quite often we have some old school methods that we have today, and they may work to achieve a specific goal in what we have to do. We have a task that we have to complete, so we find something that completes that goal, but it may be something that isn't quite supported. And it's something to remember because while it is a working solution, it may not always be the best or the supported solution to achieve the task and goal that you're trying to reach towards. The important thing about this is not just in what we're already doing today, but as we look forward towards doing cloud administration and cloud methodologies, the same old tools are no longer going to work in what we're doing going forward, or they will work differently. The analogy I use for this one is something that I had encountered once at a McDonald's restaurant. It's called cheeseburger cheese versus quarter pounder cheese. So I used to go into McDonald's and I would order a quarter pounder. Or if I would order a cheeseburger, I noticed the prices were different. If you ordered a hamburger instead of a cheeseburger, it was 10 cents cheaper. If you ordered a quarter pounder with cheese, it was 25 cents more than a quarter pounder without cheese. So what I used to do is I'm nutty, so I would go and I would ask for a quarter pounder with cheese, but I want cheeseburger cheese because it's cheaper. So I still want the cheese, but I want to pay less for it. And that's what's happening. Customers out there are doing exactly what I used to do to the poor person that worked at McDonald's. I've become, shadow customer in the same way that we have shadow IT. This whole idea that they know they can get it cheaper in a different way, even if it means doing something that isn't in the plan. So as we change the way that we do things in information technology, it's going to change the way the business consumes that service too. Even ourselves, we consume services differently. So all these layers of abstraction are entirely changing the view on how we look at our IT resources and our physical and system resources. At the same time, it also changes the way that we look at traditional performance management. Because all of those numbers that you knew, that you maybe know today, are not going to be ones that map and correlate directly into a cloud environment. The most common phrase that I see was the quote from Bill Gates, and they said, 640K ought to be enough for anybody. And he was right. But there's also a time bomb on that quote. Bill Gates didn't think that this was forever. So we can't trash him for saying that this is a statement that he made as if it was like a visionary statement, but it was true at the time. And this is exactly the same for everything that we've done up to this point in traditional IT. So the thing that you're doing right now is absolutely right for right now. But what's going to happen in a few weeks, in a few months, and in a few years? Is the statement that you made today going to be brought back to you saying, well, clearly you have no idea what you're doing today because look what you said 2 years ago. And that's why we see the shift in how we work with OpenStack and new technologies is we can't just say, well, I'm only a product X customer, because in 2 years you may not be. Adapting is something that we have to do in business processes and also in IT processes. A lot of people say, well, I know I need this. I want a SQL server, so therefore it has to have 8 CPUs and 64 gigs of RAM. Well, have you actually proven that out? Because we have to look at not just what's being asked, but what the actual requirements are. One of the key things that you need to know as a cloud administrator is how to go deep into understanding requirements, both from networking and storage and the traditional bare metal core underneath it, but also all the way up to the application layer. Understanding how to do things like I/O modeling and looking at what performance monitoring is in an environment. Because if you're moving it to a cloud resource, it may be entirely wrong to be in a cloud environment. And there's no point in saying the cloud isn't appropriate. Well, maybe the workload isn't appropriate. It's not that the workload is wrong, but the workload isn't appropriate to the model that you're putting it into. And that's perfectly fine. But understanding it is the most important part. Use statistics. There's a reason why we use performance monitoring and all of these tools to create amazing graphs. It's not just because we say that managers like graphs and infographics. It's because we ourselves need to have this information in order to feed the system. In the same way that businesses use lean analytics in order to derive what features they put into future iterations or the next iteration, it's exactly the same thing we should do when we look at workloads in traditional virtualization and whether they're appropriate to move into a cloud environment, or maybe how we need to alter how they work today to make them appropriate. In the same way that the DevOps crew always talk about the amplified feedback loop, this doesn't necessarily mean in IT that we're going to go entirely from customer all the way down to system, but at the very least within the system itself, from networking, storage, CPU compute, memory utilization, I/O, we have to understand what the full loop of performance looks like as we go into a cloud environment. Truthfully, we should know this today in traditional bare metal and virtualization, but it wasn't as much of a requirement because we're not necessarily getting charged by the minute for how we do things. So as we do this, it also changes the way that we move towards how we do day-to-day management and deployment. Anything that we do that's a manual process is inherently broken. The moment that you write it down, it is invalid because there's a chance that something has changed along the way. Now, it may not be true in every case, but it's fundamentally true across all IT that this will be a high percentage that what you just wrote down isn't necessarily going to be right either at the end of the day or perhaps at the end of the month. We have to use more recipes and manifests and other tools in order to create the environments that we deploy going forward. We can't rely on human processes to remember how these things are supposed to be done. We use things like understanding what idempotent scripting is, understanding what stateful management of resources are. This is something that's new to a lot of people because they just think I only have to run this once. Well, what if you run that script more than once? What's going to be the behavior? Because what if it goes wrong? We don't go in there and manually tinker about. We fix the script. And that's the new way that we have to look at doing things. Ultimately, you have to let the manifest become the documentation. If you have a 20-page documentation on how to deploy and harden a server, it's already a problem because we have humans who are going to read the documentation. Some won't bother to read it. Some will do it twice and they think, I remember step 3, I don't need to read it twice. That's exactly what happens, and that's why orchestration and automation are absolutely important as we look at moving, not just in what our on-premises management is, but moving into cloud environments. And take the same ideas that are being done with the DevOps movement in development and application and move that into your infrastructure management. And the real question we have to ask is, what is your tool of choice? Do you use Ansible? Do you use Puppet? Do you use Chef? The answer is good. It doesn't matter what your tool of choice is, it works. If it achieves the desired result, use the tools that you're comfortable with. You can come here and we can look at great tools and techniques to manage things, but ultimately, if it's outside of your comfort zone and you have something that will achieve the goal, use the tools you're comfortable with. You can grow them outwards from there, but let's take the processes that you have available to you now and just start to move and change the way you think of it and change the way you deploy things. And really, this is our chance to not only make ourselves better, but our peers and our future people that are going to sit in the same chair that you're sitting in when you're at the office. They've got to be able to have something, and you don't want to hand some poor kid a 20-page document saying this is how we deploy servers. You just point them to the service console and say, here's your self-service deployment for this particular application environment. So thank you very much, and I hope that this has been helpful.